I've verbally stated it out loud with people I've talked to. And then I've worked on this. I've worked on this process of sort of letting it go. Because the future that I want to create gets created by having the appreciation for that future now. Having the energy that creates the action, that creates the reality that I want, regardless of what happens with my wife's cancer. You see, it almost like it matters, but it doesn't matter because my happiness or my misery will be determined by the space that I live in my thoughts and my body, regardless of what happens externally. Oh, it's really, first of all, it's really good to see you. For our listeners don't know, like we kind of took a hiatus
Yeah,
for the last couple
sure.
of months. Like not in, I mean, I've been releasing episodes periodically. So we did a bunch of interviews like was that in July?
Dang.
I think
Yeah,
so.
it was
And
July.
yeah, and then we didn't record in August. And now we're here in middle of September. So it's been a good like month and a half since we've recorded.
I don't know if you want to reveal the reason why, and then just talk about it later at another time. Surgeries, and I
Sure,
mean,
yeah. Poe, you had big knee surgery, right? Knee
yeah,
surgery and wrist surgery.
right. But that's the reason why. We'll go into another
Yeah.
topic, or we'll talk about that in another time. I should say.
Oh yeah, we
Yeah,
can. But you're recovering from that, and there have
yeah.
been some ups and downs with that. But yeah, I think that's worth discussing. We're gonna do this new. We were playing with the name when it's just a conversation with you and me. And one of the names, I think you came up with it, but it keeps coming back into my head is Rock Your Potential. Rock Your Potential. So these will be Rock Your Potential conversations. Well, we've had these before. We just didn't call them that.
Right.
Oh, so yeah, you see the new, that's actually a neon light. I'm like making a kind of studio in this guest slash office in this guest room. And, I'm not done yet. That was the first thing I put up, but I wanna put some other stuff on the wall and eventually use that for, like, my background when I start recording more
Yeah, I think
videos and things like that.
it definitely adds a vibe to your space there. I think it's kind of cool. I mean, it's better than mine. I'm in my
I
kitchen room
love
right
it. No,
now.
I know, but I love it. I love it because it says family. I love it because it says family and always reminds me of that value, something you prioritize, something we both prioritize, something that bonds us. So,
Great
uh,
lead into the topic. This is a great lead in. Yeah, you were talking
may
about
lead into the
family.
topic. What's the topic? The topic is basically me dealing with or talking about my wife's recent diagnosis with breast cancer that came to learn like about a month ago now, I think. Maybe like 4 weeks ago, a little less than a month ago.
Yeah, so we had I think you had, yeah, I think it was either you texted me or you called me. I can't remember. It was something urgent. I think I called you back and then we had the conversation. I think it was how it went down.
I talked to you a few days after I found out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so we were on we've been on that recording hiatus, but yeah, you and I have been able to talk periodically and
Well, let's walk through like what was happening with your wife. Just for people that
yeah,
women that
sure.
that
Yeah, I
it's
think
a
this is
warning sign for them.
right. Good point. First of all, my wife is 40 years old. She up until recently, so we usually like so she's kind of that's fairly young to have
Yeah.
breast cancer, although increasingly we're seeing cancer in younger and younger people. And there's a whole probably bunch of reasons for that, but we could talk about sometime. But
She's very
that
active too, from my understanding.
she's yeah, yeah, she's very
Yeah, very
healthy.
healthy, active.
She's
Yeah.
been vegetarian like most of her life. She doesn't really, I mean, she's actually developed like a dairy allergy a few years
Oh,
ago.
wow.
So she doesn't really eat dairy either. And she runs, yeah, she's like a runner. She's
Yeah.
really active. So this was a couple years ago. She had like a little firm area. in her breast that I think she noticed it initially. And then she went to go see the doctor and they got a mammogram. Mammogram is a type of x-ray that's done on the breast. And right, it's basically an x-ray of the breast. Women start getting screening mammograms. The age sort of keeps changing and it partly depends if you have a family history and but now as early as like 40 is when women are getting screening mammograms. And this wasn't a screening mammogram though, because they felt something, right? So they felt something, so they had her get a mammogram. It did nothing showed up on the mammogram though, which doesn't I mean, that basically just means it doesn't show up on the mammogram. Like only certain types of lesions, if they have like calcium in them, or I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm not a radiologist, but not everything shows up on mammogram. So,
Good to
um,
know too. I didn't know that. And I assumed that if they have a mammogram, it should tell them everything. So that speak to that a little bit.
yeah, well, so mammogram is a screening test, but it doesn't catch everything. And so in certain individuals, like if somebody has a lump,
Yeah.
then and it doesn't show up on mammogram, it doesn't remove the fact that they have a lump. It maybe makes it a little less likely that it's cancer
Mhm.
because cancerous lesions more often tend to show up on mammograms. So mammogram's a good screening test. I'd have to remind myself of like how good of a screening test it is, but it's not without every screening test will miss some
Some
cases.
things.
And sometimes the opposite. Actually, preferably screening tests should catch more false positives. And right, that's we set the threshold so like we're catching more things. Not everyone who screens positive. Some women will have a mammogram, it'll screen positive. So both happen, right? You get some false negatives and some false positives. And so but anyway, she had a mammogram that was normal. And then I think at that time, she had an ultrasound, right? So
Oh,
that there's different ways you can image these little masses. And so she had an ultrasound, and then this thing was like so small and it wasn't even showing up on ultrasound. So the next step, well, this is likely something benign, given your age, given its appearance, lack of appearance, and given the how it feels on exam. Like it felt like something firm and discreet. So doctor thought it was less likely to be concerning, and she agreed. I remember she told me about this and at the time, and she's like, "Well, we'll just do kind of surveillance." Right? So self-surveillance, she was feeling this thing last couple of years. And this was during the pandemic that she got this checked out, I think. It was like in 2020. And then she didn't go back until this year. She turned 40. Saw her doctor. Doctor sort of said, "Let's get another mammogram. You're 40." Mammogram didn't show anything. Ultrasound, this time ultrasound did show this like kind of discrete little nodule. And they said, the radiologist said and was like, we could just biopsy it right now, or we can just do surveillance like every 6 months, can like come in, get it, make sure it's not changing. Cause it looked like something benign on the ultrasound. The radiologist was saying like this. You remember the original report before they got the pathology back? It said favor benign diagnosis because of the appearance, whatever. So we went on a family vacation. She got the biopsy done. That was like on Thursday. And then Friday, we went on family vacation for a week. And then we came back that weekend. And then that Monday, this was about a month ago, she got called. And yeah, to just a type of breast cancer, invasive ductal carcinoma. That's turns out the most common type of breast cancer. So 80% of breast cancers are this particular type. And so then we're sort of like left wondering. I mean, I'll stop there because it's very easy for me to go down this medical pathway. In fact, I find myself doing it a lot when I talk to people because it doesn't force it keeps me from like acknowledging my feelings and
Just gonna ask about what causes what do you know that causes this type of cancer so that people
mm,
know,
sure,
if
sure.
we even know what causes it. I don't know
That's a
if,
good question. We don't even know.
yeah,
I mean, there's so many things now. It's a combination of predisposition, genetic predisposition,
okay.
and environmental factors. And
Mm,
all of that leads to, I mean, cancer is just basically, your cells are replicating all the time, constantly. Right now, as we're talking, like so many cells in your body are just replicating. And every so often, there's a little mistake. Our body's very good. We have all these mechanisms to catch those mistakes and to basically kill off bad eggs. And every so often, the this will happen. Something will evade our normal mechanisms to stop that or prevent that, and you'll get the conglomeration or the proliferation of these abnormal cells. And they're
um,
abnormal and it happens then it depends, right? So there's so many different types. That word is a very loaded word. Cancer. Well, cancer, right? It refers to all different types of cancer and all different like stages of cancer. And there's so much variability, but I mean, I don't know. We can talk about that too.
I was gonna ask, like, is there family history? Like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Paul. Like that's also something we ask about is there a family history? And there's certain genetic risk factors that run in families. Like if an individual had breast cancer, gets screened for that, then oftentimes like other women in their family will be notified um to potentially screen for that. And the reason being that there are things you can do prophylactically. Like you can, if you have some of these high risk genetic mutations, like Angelina Jolie, the actress
Yeah.
Angelina Jolie, she had one of these high risk mutations. So there's a higher likelihood that she would get like a much higher likelihood that she would get breast cancer in her lifetime. So she elected to get bilateral mastectomy, meaning removal of her breasts prophylactically, like as a preventative measure. She had her breasts removed and then reconstructed. And so that's one whole piece of this is there's a genetic risk. And so asking if it runs in families is a really important question. Up until recently, my wife would have said no. But then about a year ago, her aunt, her direct aunt, her mom's sister, got this type of cancer. Now she's much older, obviously. She's in her 70s and she's doing I saw her recently. So right after we got the diagnosis, they just happened to be in town like the following weekend. And so we went to go see them. They stayed with my in-laws. We went to go see them and that they were so like positive and I mean, she has just finished my wife's aunt has just finished like, she had a mastectomy or surgery and then radiation and then chemo, and so she recently finished chemotherapy, and she's her hair is starting to grow back, um, but she was in such good spirits on that same trip. They, um they spent some time in the Bay Area, and then they went to Yosemite, and she went hiking. And so, she was like, "See how good I've done, and there's no reason you shouldn't expect to do as well or not even better." And, my wife has embraced that, not maybe the first day, but, like, very quickly, she's had this, like, very, very deep positivity, I would say, like, very deep positivity where she also has, I would say she's been more connected with her being, her state of, like, true being, like, she's
Yeah.
been meditating for longer amounts of time in the morning. She told me I could talk about I was like, "Can I talk about
I was
this?"
just gonna ask, yeah.
She said I could talk
Sure.
about all this. I asked her, and she says, "I know I'm gonna be fine." I have this kind of deep knowing. And
Wow.
yeah, and so that's, I have to say her whole attitude and presence has been infectious in the household. So because I can also talk about how, my mind has, eh, I didn't start off hearing this news with a deep knowing that she was gonna be fine, right? How could I? It's not me, and I would say my mind is sort of just jumping to, like, what, worst case scenarios, like
Yeah.
what the human brain loves to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is
Me
to
too.
ruminate and imagine, like, you know, what all the terrible things that might happen. And then early on, I would say the first several days, like, I was just having a really, I mean, that's, I think, when I talked to you, like, I was just having a really hard time. I was just having a really hard time with it, you know? I was feeling a lot of, and I realize now, I mean, it's like it's going through this kind of process of grieving, and I was like, "What am I was thinking about it this morning as I was thinking about what we were gonna talk about, and I was like, "What am I grieving actually?" Like, and I think I'm grieving, like, a world where my wife didn't have cancer, like,
Mm.
where that wasn't our new reality. And so then in saying that, I'm like, well, that's because that news has caused a shift. But I'm not sure, like, in the grieving process, there is like this sort of denial. I've been, and early on, I was like, do they have the right sample? Like,
Yeah.
and anger and sadness. And I have experienced a lot of that. And then ideally, you sort of get to a place where there's acceptance and growth. I don't know. That's what I'm working on. I mean, I definitely have worked on. I mean, I'm definitely like at the acceptance. Like, just, I'm. I love that my wife is sort of accepting of this and then choosing to live from this space of positivity, and that it's uplifting for all of us. And I wouldn't expect, like, if I was just like envisioning this happening, I was like, I wouldn't expect like the person going through it to be the source of strength
Mm.
necessarily for everyone.
Yeah.
And that I have to just like give just so much appreciation to my wife for how she's been. And then I'm like taking that and I'm like, I think you said it to, maybe it was you said it to me. You said, because there's going to be maybe times in the future where she's going to need you, and not just related to this, like in life, like where she's going to need your positivity. Like, if you need her positivity right now, like, take it in, like, it's there for the taking. So that's, I'm trying to like take that in.
Yeah. Hey, when you were sharing that with me during that time, I thought, man, that is pretty remarkable that, you know, someone is told, given the news, like, hey, cancer is amongst your family. And it's the person that's actually that has the cancer that's giving off the best attitude
Mhm.
about it. You know what I
Mm.
mean? And the best energy about it. And it's like, it would be one thing if the person or if she took it the other way where she was just like doom and gloom. I mean, that would make this experience a lot harder, I would assume.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, but instead she's looking at it like, like you were saying, I don't think you told me that she just had this all knowing that she was going to be okay. I felt like, man, that is just like really powerful, you know, for the person
She
that's taken on that has the news, that actually has the cancer to be the source of the strength.
mm,
I mean, you can't really mess with that. You know what I mean? Like, that's
yeah,
like, you
yeah,
gotta just like, okay, where am I not? What am I not seeing? Who am I not
mm,
being for her? And, um,
yeah, yeah,
I,
that's it. That's right. That's exactly
yeah,
right. It's caused me to sort of then like question, like, it's allowed it really it's helped me get to that sort of acceptance. And then I want to talk about the growth. You know, you and I always say this, like when life offers us challenges, they're really all challenges are opportunities.
Are all opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to share like the one thing too. It's really interesting because it's kind of a reverse. Like for my situation, I want to apply it to this because having the surgeries I needed a lot of assistance from my wife.
Mm,
And so what I found is that I'm the one that's like opposite of your wife. I'm like bad attitude, like, why is this happening to me? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
mm,
and my wife shows the exact opposite, like she's the one that's been helping me get up and down, some stairs or
mm,
having to help, get me into the shower, and she
mm, mm,
maintains this attitude of like, you got to do it, let's just get it done. So that's why,
mm,
like, for even when you were telling me about how your wife was taking it, it was like remarkable. It was like kind of like a source of inspiration that I was actually viewing my wife, like,
mm,
seeing her in a different light. In a way, they were both exemplifying that sort of it is sort of like this sense of, I don't even know what to call it, like this energy of like, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this type of
We're gonna get
situation.
through
And
this.
yeah, and in a different way, like right now, my wife has been a source of power for me in how she's been helping me. And so I feel like when you were telling me about your wife having cancer and still being like, I don't know if it's a motherly thing. I mean, I'm not saying that is,
Yeah.
I almost wonder if it's like that, you know, and it's like their
In
being
their
to,
in their
because
being.
they're mothers, right? They have,
Mm.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just going
But
off, but
no, maybe Poe, I thought about this. I've thought about how it hasn't just impacted me. And I'm sure your wife's presence hasn't just impacted you, it impacts the kids.
yeah,
And my kids have such a they have such a good attitude about
yeah,
everything that's happening because she's maintained such a good attitude
dude,
about
100%.
everything. Yeah. And I think she's intentional about that. I think she looks at, but I just want to go back to that, like this hearing, like, when you find out, and it's not even me, right? Especially like, but it's my wife. I love my wife
Right,
so
right.
much. And she's got cancer. So when you hear that, it suddenly, and we're young. I mean, I'm relatively young. We're relatively young, like we're in our 40s. And so when you hear that, it's a reminder of I don't know, the I would say the finality of things. Not that I think she's gonna die from this, although that obviously, like, crossed my mind. My daughter asked her, like, after a day or 2, this question, just point blank, like, "Mommy, are you gonna die from this?" And she paused, and then she said, "Well, we're all gonna die of something, and no, I don't think I'm gonna die from this." And she was so, like, she's just been so sure that I'm now believing
Yeah.
I'm now believing. And it also just it's not like a sort of black and white thing. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen next. Like, she's gonna have surgery tomorrow. I mean, I know what's gonna happen next, but I don't know what we're gonna find out. She's gonna have surgery tomorrow, and then like a week later, we'll find out if it was in any of the lymph nodes. And also some other like genetic information on the actual tumor, the cancer. And both of those pieces of information, then they'll use to decide if she needs chemotherapy.
So the journey
So,
is still ongoing.
journey is still ongoing. And so it's easier said than done, but I've also realized like there's no, I mean, my wife is epitomizing this by living this way, but I'm reminding myself there's no benefit in just in being anxious and worry about what might happen or what information we might get or what, you know. So I'd acknowledge I spent a good amount of time for our listeners and for you, Poe. One of the books that has been really, really helpful for me in this process, because I read it recently, I listen to it actually. I often say I read books when I listen to them. But these days, so many people listen to books that it's not something you have to hide. Like when I first started dating in the mid 2000s and I was online dating, I would hide it. It was like, it was taboo to like use these data. Anyway, so I listened to this book. I listened to this book called Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins. And it's a letting go, the pathway to surrender, and highly recommended. I had a patient I was taking care of in one of my lifestyle medicine groups who, when she mentioned this book in one of our groups, she said, I heard her say it maybe 3 or 4 times. After she would say the book, she would say, it changed my life. Just sort of like rolled off her tongue. It changed my life. It changed my life. And I was like, to so and so, I was like, you said that 3 times. Like, so then and it's not, I mean, other people have written about this too, but it's sort of like, it's this idea that you acknowledge the emotion that you're feeling. You acknowledge it and you identify where it is in your body, you're creating tension, and then you release it. You intentionally say, I don't, I recognize this, that I'm feeling this, and I don't want to feel this way. So I'm going to let go of this. And you can do this for any negative emotion. You can do this for guilt. You can do this for sadness. You can do this for anger, you know? So the first step is the recognition and the allowing, to really allow it to come. You don't say, the opposite would be repressing the emotion or suppressing the emotion. Either we're consciously aware or unconsciously, you know, repressing it. And that's not the same thing. In this way, you're allowing, I've allowed a lot of my fear and sadness to emerge. I've acknowledged it. I've verbally stated it out loud with people I've talked to. And then I've worked on this process of sort of letting it go. Because the future and we talked about this when we did our episode on gratitude, the future that I want to create gets created by having the appreciation for that future now,
Right.
having the energy that creates the action, that creates the reality that I want, regardless of what happens with my wife's cancer. You see, it almost like it matters, but it doesn't matter because my happiness or my misery will be determined by the space that I live in my thoughts and my body, regardless of what happens externally. So, anyway, that's where like the meditation practice comes in, where I can like see these things and sit with them and let it go and let it go. There's been a lot of letting go. And when I have negative emotions and they still come up, I just, it's almost like I don't say it's a skill. It's
Oh
like a
yeah,
skill.
it is a skill because
It's a
I'll tell
skill.
you right now, it's very difficult to not be attached to an idea and let it go. I mean, I can speak for myself. It can be very challenging to not have that space because, like I think we talked about it before. Sometimes your kids can cause a reaction out of you,
Mm,
if they're not listening and you're
yeah.
trying, this is like the third or fourth time you've told them to please stop or something, or,
Yeah.
you're driving and someone cuts you off. I mean, these are like
Yeah.
everyday things that
Yeah.
happen that, um, depending on what frame of mind you're in, right? And like right now, I feel like because you've been talking about it, it's like it's a reminder of that space that still exists. But
Mm,
myself, we tend to think that it doesn't exist. Well, I shouldn't say it does. It's because you don't. If I don't practice it, if I don't exercise it like a muscle, it's not going
yeah.
to grow, right? But I'm actually grateful that you spoke about it, especially dealing with cancer. Like, I mean, I guess that's like a form of enlightenment when you can actually not be attached to the idea of it.
Mhm. And I started off by saying easier said than done because,
Yeah.
these worldly attachments and the attachments to people and relationships and all that is, that is, it's hard to to let go of.
Yeah,
Um,
because I feel like with our podcast here in our space, like this space that we create, and since we've been on a sort of somewhat of an hiatus, it's a great way to realize, like, man, like I really need to have this space because
mm,
when I'm not in this conversation with you, it's like extremely difficult to keep that space, right? I'm referring to that space you're talking
yeah,
about, of that little tiny gap between how you choose to feel versus how you automatically, like your autopilot
yeah,
feeling, which
yeah,
I think a lot of us, including myself, I go into automatic autopilot all the time. I become
yeah,
reactionary versus I think when you practice meditation or if you know, you listen to audiobooks like we were saying, or even reading books, there's still, it allows you that space to sort of make a different decision. And I think the people that practice that every day, they have that sense of peace, right?
yeah. I think so. I think so. Listen, I react as well, and I always now when I catch myself reacting, I'm more likely to catch myself reacting too in the moment, even if I have started reacting. I can sort of catch myself and reverse course. And because I very quickly realize that it's creating negative energy and I don't that's not helpful. That feels very bad actually. Like it'll if I'm for example, if I'm getting upset at my kids, then very quickly like we're having just sort of like argument or this negative energy between us that just feels terrible. It's like, no, this isn't the relationship I want to have with my children. Like this isn't I can catch myself very quickly and just take a pause. And we have this thing in our family when somebody says something and then they in the moment recognize that they're sort of reacting, that they can do a rewind. And so you ask permission, can I do a rewind? And the person who's sort of listened, like, the kid or me or whoever is listening will say, okay. And then the person doing the rewind says, buzz, 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 buzz. I don't know how we came up with this. Like, it's like the sound of rewinding, and then you go back to the moment before you had that reaction,
Oh, okay.
and you choose to respond differently.
Right.
It's really anyway,
Oh, cool.
it gives you, like, a second chance.
Yeah.
It gives you, like, a second chance if you can and sometimes you've reacted so strongly, though, that the other person will say, "No, you can't do a rewind. I
Mm,
need some space. So now's not a time to ask me for anything." So
that's pretty cool.
it doesn't always
Doesn't
work.
always work. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask about when you, so you, what were you going through when you first heard, like when you first heard that your wife has cancer, has the diagnosis of cancer? Like, what was your, because I remember when you talked to me about it, I started thinking about my wife having cancer. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Mm,
I told my wife after we talked, I was like, dude, my wife has cancer. And, I started thinking about a world where my wife was there.
yeah.
And that's scary for me.
That's where my mind went
Yeah.
right away. And I started thinking about, like, being a single father and, like, what
Man.
I was like, this is what the mind does,
Right.
right? This was
100%.
before we even knew we just all we knew was this biopsy positive, but she hadn't gotten, like, additional imaging, we hadn't met with
Yeah.
surgeon, like, I was just creating this worst case scenario and it was, a lot of these things then they're based out of fear,
100%. Yeah.
right? And so fear is definitely, I would say, a negative emotion in that
In
right?
this context. In this context, for sure.
I mean, when is it not?
Well, danger.
Sure, if you
Like
say
when
fear
you're
sort of protects us,
in some cases, yes.
yeah.
In this context, I would say this is a whole nother topic, but I would say
This is a
this
whole other
context,
topic.
yes. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I was gonna say, like, you could rationally approach a dangerous situation and have, like, reasons for not doing it, but not necessarily live in the fear. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
it can
No,
look
no, no.
different. Like,
Totally. Totally.
yeah, I hear you. Like, there's some like, that's true, Poe. Like, innately sort of want to protect ourselves. Like our this is why we
Yeah.
avoid discomfort, and in general, like human beings, we try to avoid discomfort.
Well, a buddy of mine had a good analogy of like, 100 years ago. I mean, maybe longer than that. Yeah, I don't know the time frames, but let's say, if you saw, there was a bush shaking, and the
Uh-huh.
last time you saw the bush shaking was a cat, like a big cat that could kill you. The natural reaction is that
Mm,
shaky bush there's a cat behind
yeah.
that bush.
Right.
So that plays into, okay, we're
Right.
not going that way. We're going to go the
Right.
other way. So that's what I
Right.
mean by
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
there is healthy fear because
Yeah.
that's what, like, we know if we touch the oven
Yeah.
when it's on,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
burn it. So I
Fair
think,
point.
yeah,
There
you know
is
what I mean?
that is probably one aspect of
That's the
fear
only
that
way I feel
I
like
can
that's
think of
what
it.
got us to where we are today.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that we're just, we're still alive because of our
Yeah.
genetics, right? Like
I think the
people have
fear I'm talking about, it's the imagined fear, of the storylines that we create, and that,
totally.
we that has such a gripping effect on our lives, right? The storylines have a gripping effect on our lives. They
Oh yeah.
basically dictate how we so if they're fear-based storylines, then they very much keep you where you're at, or they prevent you from maybe, to your point, like taking risks or doing things that you might otherwise do. So I had that fear. That fear definitely was like the first thing I was feeling. And then also like living in that fear, so in that storyline, you sort of like have sadness related to that
Yeah.
storyline. I sort of thinking about like, oh, what? And then that's been the process over the last few weeks, is sort of recognizing that and then letting go of it. And then like really, like I said, soaking in that optimism, positivity, and like where my wife is living,
Wow,
l-
it's
like that has for me, that has been one of the biggest reasons, the biggest of reasons I've been able to shift my where I'm coming from. And then just all the kind of outpouring of love and support from our friends and family. Like it's, so the kind of the things I'm taking from this, because you never want anyone to get cancer. And this has happened, and it's like, wow, there's so many things to be grateful for.
what was some of the storylines in your mind? Like, what were some of the statements you were saying to yourself
Mm.
while getting that information? You know?
Yeah, the initial storylines were sort of like doomsday storylines, like, I don't know what's gonna happen, but and I see, part of this is I've worked in the hospital for like 15 years. So I took care of young people who would come in with different types of cancer. I mean, I can remember like having a mother of young kids with breast cancer, metastatic breast cancer, and sort of fighting on, but like really at a stage, by the time they come in the hospital and it's not related to their treatment, it's related to complications. I was seeing this sort of, you know, the end stage. And usually when someone's younger, much more likely to kind of be more aggressive in whatever it is. Even if the likelihood of success is small, like we would do heroic efforts on people
So
with
how did it feel
cancer.
though, like now that it's happening? So now you've treated patients, you've been down that road and now it is now you. It's now affecting you
Right.
directly.
Yeah,
What was the
it's like
first
it's sort of
what was the first
first feels sort of surreal, and then it's like, right, so it's all those things, it's like there's some denial, and then once you sort of wrap your head around it, it's all the emotions, all those things that you feel when you're grieving, like, there's been this sadness, um, in imagining these hypothetical futures, or just, like, sometimes, like, hearing I don't know, it's like like we were watching this show, Undercover Boss. Have you ever seen that
Yeah.
show?
Yeah. It's a good show.
And yeah, it's a good show. and we were watching with our kids, but like a lot, but we kind of stopped watching it in the last few weeks because a lot of those employees have really heartfelt stories, and oftentimes it's like my father died of cancer at, I mean, we were watching one. My father died of cancer at 45 when he was 45, and I was just looking at my
Mhm.
wife. I'm looking back at her and I'm like, I don't even know if my kids are sort of processing this, but then in that moment I get really sad too. Like I almost had to like hide it because I didn't want everyone in the family to see that I was feeling really kind of sad by that. Anyway,
No,
so that
so yeah, I think that's me. I'm a big a person on like, it's okay to show. I can't say I've always been this way, but I feel like because I'm like who I am, it's okay to like process that feeling and that emotion in the moment. You know what I mean? Like I find nowadays I'm more inclined to, if I feel something in the moment, I'm going to feel it. And if my kids see it and witness it, I want them to, because
yeah,
that's a real learning time right there. And they're going to ask you questions.
yeah.
And it's happened before. Now I can't say I've always been like that, but I feel like as I get older, I'm more inclined to
Mhm.
be emotional with my kids, because I feel that's it's like a sense of maturity, right? I think when we're younger, it's harder to process my own emotions, and let alone try to express it to my kids of what I'm feeling. But I feel like as I'm getting older, part of like being in this health feast is like, sharing that it's okay to process that emotion in the time. Now, granted, it's one thing, it's all about timing, right? But if it's just me and my daughters and we're watching a movie that I find that there's a touching part in the movie that causes some emotion to come out of me, for me, I'm more inclined to just let it go,
Mm,
because it's a way of like acknowledging, like, man, that why does that part, or why does that, like you were saying, undercover boss, there's moments in there that touch you because it
yeah,
applies to you, and there's a reason why it's causing an
yeah,
emotion of you, because it's drawing that out of you. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So if it wasn't something that you felt, then you wouldn't feel anything about it. But because it's drawing something out of you, I think it's sort of
yeah,
it's a great teacher of the moment, right? Because then your kids are gonna be like,
yeah,
"Dad, what's wrong?" And I'm like, "Oh, then that's when the learning happens." It's like, "Oh, wow, it's okay to like feel something," because which the reason why I was asking about those emotions, because then it leads into the healing of it,
yeah,
right? That's the part that we're getting to. You got to actually have to me, it's like you got to go in there where it's sort of dark and grieving, in order for it to eventually turn into something that's like beautiful, and that like, well, this is all part of life, like cancer
mm,
happens, and
mm,
and and it's how you respond to the news versus the news. It's how you respond to the news, right? Like, and so that's why when you said that, we talked about a month ago, and you were telling me about your wife, man, I like looked at my wife and was just like, man, I started watering up, because I just put
mm,
myself in your position immediately. And I was just like, man, and then when you were telling me how your wife was taking it, I was like, wow, dude, that is so freaking
I
empowering,
know,
man. Like, I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I could have cancer and be like that. I
mm.
don't know, you know? So I
That's probably true for me too. I think if the tables were reversed, like, I yeah, I don't know if I'd be, I mean, I'd like to believe
right, of course.
that I could be. Now having experienced this,
Yes.
I realize that's the way to be.
Yeah,
That's the way to be, like,
yeah, that's the standard, right? That should be the standard now, right? In your own self.
yeah,
I feel the same way. It's like, dude, hearing that, it's like, dude, I don't, and you, I mean, then it shows like this, you're not, I don't know, like, I don't know, we could walk down how that, if you still choose to be miserable, even though you have cancer, I mean, after being around someone who has cancer and is completely
no,
taking
yeah,
this
right.
approach, it's like, it's not going to get me down. I'm going to keep living my life.
That's
I mean, it's
right.
the ultimate non-victim story. Like, she's not a victim to the cancer. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And
yeah,
I think that's all that matters, really. Cause, like, if you're the person that's experiencing the cancer and you're choosing not to be a victim to the idea of it, I mean, what better way to sort of defeat cancer in a way? Like, it can never get you up here type thing. You know what I mean?
mm.
Like, it can
It's a
get your,
great analogy for, like, life in general, like, regardless of what our
Yeah.
external circumstances are, this is what I was saying. Like you could be miserable or you could be joyous. And so that's seeing it is another thing. Like seeing my wife be joyous in the face of a cancer diagnosis and needing surgery and
Yeah.
is it's been a really positive, unexpected outcome of this.
Experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know she was going to surgery tomorrow. How does that? How walk us through that? Like, how are you feeling about that? Man,
Yeah.
I didn't realize
Um
how close it was.
Yeah, I mean, after she got the biopsy, then she got an MRI of her breast, and there was another area that looked potentially concerning, and they were gonna biopsy that, and she decided instead of getting another biopsy, she would get the entire breast removed. So, prior to that, they were just gonna remove or one option is to just remove the lump, like the area of
Yeah.
interest, and,
Mhm.
she very quickly, like, realized that, why would you do that? Because then you spare the breast, like, they can, basically conserve the breast, but now she's gonna get reconstruction at the same time, so she'll have an implant on that side, and it is what it is. It is what it is. I mean, she's, like, taught I'm learning all these things because her nipple gets removed, so now there's these artists that do nipple tattoos that look three-dimensional. So and yeah, right? Like she's learned I also didn't realize how common 1 in 8 women in this country in their lifetime will have breast cancer.
A
It's
lot of
insane.
math with this, but that's high. Isn't that same thing?
12 and a half.
Well,
Yeah, I think that's 12.5%. So it's high.
that's
That's
high, right?
it's
Wow.
high. Yeah. It's very high and tends to be
Well,
older women. Right?
okay.
Most cases tend to be, like, older, but that just speaks to how common it is,
Can I
and
ask? I'd like to speak to like, what do you think that is? Like, why is
Mhm.
breast cancer becoming higher amongst younger people? What do you think? Have you done any research on that, or have you learned anything since the diagnosis from doctors that this is
I
a
have my
specialty? Like,
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of so we're seeing more cancers in general in younger people across the board, like more GI cancers, more idiopathic, like, lung cancers, and those are still uncommon, but regardless, that speaks to, like, what is it, right? What is it in our environment? It must be something
something's
environmental,
going on, right?
right? And we're just, I think, exposed to a lot of chemicals and toxins on a regular basis, many that we're, like, probably unaware of. You look at our water. Our water has I'd say the biggest none of this is, like this is my opinion, I'm gonna say, but I
Gotcha.
would say one of the biggest my opinion is one of the biggest factors in this is plastics, the chemicals in plastics. The chemicals in plastics, the one that everybody knows about is BPA. And there are many, many other chemicals that resemble BPA and are even worse than BPA that are not regulated and aren't reported. So most everything we use has plastic. Yeah,
Wow.
like you buy something in an aluminum can, like a can of soda, for example. Guess what? A can has a plastic liner, a very thin layer of plastic on the inside. Or you buy beans in a can. There's a thin layer of plastic. Now they're saying BPA free, but it almost doesn't mean anything because there are
I mean,
equally bad
other types of
that
plastic.
aren't, yeah. In fact, so hard plastics are like everywhere, right? And so when I was, yeah, when my kids were small, I started learning about some of this stuff. And maybe I'll link to a really great article in our show notes that kind of gets into this. It's kind of old at this point, 5 or 6 years, but um I say all that because there's also microplastics in our water. And so why but the plastic chemicals have a estrogen like effect in the body. They bind estrogen receptor. In some cases, like something like BPA binds the estrogen receptor, what we call irreversibly. So it binds the receptor and doesn't let go, and it just keeps activating it. And so this is also one theory why we're seeing earlier onset of puberty in young girls. And there's probably a lot of reasons behind that, uh, but plastics and estrogen in the diet are probably the biggest contributors. And so going back to my wife's breast cancer, she has a variant, that when somebody has breast cancer, they also check for certain changes. She doesn't have any of those. And then they also check for if they're sensitive to estrogen or progesterone. Like there's these receptors on the cancer. And it's actually a good sign if they are, because there's drugs now. We've had drugs for some time that can be used after she's done with treatments to kind of prevent it from coming back, that basically block estrogen in the body. Anyway, that is to say that these estrogenic effects of plastics and the chemicals in plastics probably is contributing. It's a cancer that grows in the presence of estrogen, and you have chemicals in plastics that mimic estrogen and work like estrogen in the body, and in some cases even more profoundly than actual estrogen would, then and it's like hard to get away from plastic, but I try.
I was gonna say, like, it's crazy how much we depend. Like a lot of our products that we daily use has some type of form of plastic. It's in some type of form of plastic. So it's just
Let me just quickly give our listeners some quick tips, because if you want to reduce plastic, key thing to know is these chemicals leach when they're heated. um, they leach more readily into. So you never want to heat plastic like in the microwave or whatever, or put hot liquids in a plastic bottle. I would say in general, if you can get like a glass or metal water bottle, that is preferred. I've gotten away from plastic. For my kids, when they were small, we in India, they use a lot of stainless steel, especially for little kids, but even just in general. So my like in-laws still had all these like stainless steel plates and cups and stuff when my wife was small, and we used a lot of those. And we still use those actually. We never used um, plastic plates and cups and things like that. A lot of people will for little kids because they drop things, so they don't want to break it. But you can get relatively inexpensive stainless steel things. Now, you can't put those in the microwave, stainless steel,
right. How do
obviously.
you microwave
So you
stuff?
have to
How do you
microwave it
microwave?
no, it's two-step process. You have to microwave it in a regular bowl and then put it in the stainless steel for serving.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it's a little bit more involved, but it creates more dishes. I think we always have a lot of dishes in my house. You'll see a big sink full of stainless steel things sticking out. Um, And yeah, but you can't get away from plastic completely. I mean, there are these kind of more advanced, I think, water filter. I was looking into this. You can get, I don't have one of these, that maybe filter out the microplastics. And then you can just try to just buy products but like pretty much everything is packaged in plastic. Like everything,
Same.
like
Like when you think
bread
about it,
and
like we've depended on it for so many years. When is it? Like the early 70s? What time frame was when plastic became like the main? I mean,
yeah,
plastic
it's in the
bags,
article
plastic
that I'll
everything.
link, but no, it was developed earlier than that, but it very quickly became it's made out of petroleum, right? So
Yeah,
it's a polymer, I don't know, I'm not a chemist, but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
anyway, there's many types of plastics, and there's different hardness, and some are probably more toxic than others, but like hard plastic, in general, produces these kind of toxic substances when you heat it. So
Uh,
that's, I would say, the probably one of the biggest contributors. But there's so many things like in our environment and like food, there's additives in food, God knows what, that probably contribute.
Yeah, because
Anyway.
even with the air fryers now, because that's a new thing, air fryers, and they have these silicone things that you put food that you can warm
So
up in the air
silicone's a
fryer.
good Silicone's probably safer. Like at high temperatures, silicone is much more stable. It can at very high heat
But
release
not
these,
microwave heat or
not micro, yeah, generally it's silicone's much safer. So if you are going to use something plastic, like for kids, there are silicone products. Those are probably safe. And there are silicone like water bottles and things like that too. And you're right, silicone is microwave safe. So that would be one option. But in general, even with silicone, I don't recommend heating it, right? Like if it's going to release something toxic, it's because you heat it. You can put something warm in it, or I don't know. You don't really
yeah.
need,
So taking it back to
yeah,
what's going on with your wife. So her surgery's tomorrow.
surgery's
What are your
tomorrow.
thoughts? And like, I mean, you're obviously still in it. Like it's not, we're not at the end of this where it's,
Yeah.
you're still kind of in the situation. I mean, do you have obviously your wife's just been fantastic about it, which I still think is remarkable. She's definitely an inspiration. I mean, I haven't even met her, but I can already tell that's like, she's pretty inspirational in the sense that she's able to take this on. Like, you know, I mean, man, but like, moving forward, like, what are your aspirations with the situation?
Mm.
Like, kind of hard to have a game plan,
Oh
but
yeah.
if
I
there
mean,
was such a
I
thing,
can tell you best case scenario is like we find out that there's no cancer in the lymph nodes and it was just in the breast. And then she may still need chemotherapy because she's pretty young and they're going to do some like genetic score based on the cancer, but that would be the probably best case scenario. And then otherwise, I mean, I don't want to say there's a worst case because then the other scenario is like there is cancer in the lymph node and then they have to probably do some more imaging and chemotherapy, and that'll just look different. And our foreseeable future will look different than what I was expecting. Now I have sort of let go of any expectation of what my
I was
foreseeable
just gonna
future.
say, yeah, that seems the best way to go about it, huh? Just
Yeah.
kind of focus on being present and sort of day to day, going back to gratitude, like being grateful for what you have now versus what's to
Yeah.
come. And I didn't, one thing I wanted to ask was how are the kids? Like, how are the kids dealing
How
with?
they handling? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I would
like
say they're
what's
doing really well. I mean, I think, yeah, I think my daughter's the oldest and she's almost 12. So she gets it a little. I mean, they all get it, but, or they all know she has cancer and they all know she's having surgery. I don't know if
they realize?
the younger two realize that it could be more serious, like, but in a way that's good. I mean, they're living in a place of like in the present moment where they're happy, their mom is happy, their dad is mostly happy, and family is happy. And we're spending a lot of, I mean, if something like this really helps sharpen your values,
Mm,
and I think like it's really caused me to ask myself like what is important to me, and how do I want to be spending my time, right? How do I want to be spending my time? And so I think in that sense, it's coming for me also at a, like, again, now this would never be welcome news, but it's coming at a good time as I'm in this transition in my own career. And I'm sort of asking myself this, like, what is it I want to do in this role? What do I want to create more of? And this is really helping me recognize what's important and what's meaningful to me. And I'd say my commitment to like lifestyle has only grown since getting this diagnosis. Like I see it as, and she even says it. She says, if I didn't eat this healthy, it probably would be like in various parts of my body at this point, and like, right, it would have behaved very differently. And I believe that. I'm like, yeah, definitely. Like
right.
your
Yeah.
lifestyle very well may have kept this whole thing at bay. And so,
Growing faster than it is. Yeah,
right,
totally.
right.
100% agree with you. Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, we're just eating a lot of, like, colorful fruits, vegetables. Um, I just started sprouting again, broccoli sprouts. I was sprouting during the pandemic because 'cause they're really good for your immune system. And broccoli, like all cruciferous vegetables, have this compound or eventually have this compound called sulforaphane. And sulforaphane is in a way it's anti-cancer, I guess is what I wanted to say about it. It has all these potential health benefits, but yeah, in like a petri dish, you put this sulforaphane extract, it'll kill, breast cancer cells. So I'm gonna start feeding my wife sprouts every day. I've been a little bit more mindful of the kind of food that we bring in. I mean, I always have been, but especially for her, I don't know, even for my kids, but I know you can't be perfect. You can get so caught up in like everything that you're exposed to and consuming to a point where it becomes, I don't know, almost paralyzing, like almost too much. And so I'm not there. Uh, but yeah, it's definitely made me sort of like want to double down on healthy lifestyle. And then I'm thinking, not just for me, not just for my family, but for everyone. Like that's what I want to do in this world. I know that. I mean, that's why we do this podcast. That's why I connected with you. And it's so I'm working on creating a new business and more details to follow. I don't know. By the time I publish this podcast, it might be actually it'd probably be live and whatever. So I'll just give the website if anyone's listening. Um, it's Rock Your Life. So RAKYOURLIFE.com. And yeah, you can work with me. You can work with me either by attending group visits that we're going to have weekly or seeing me individually or both. And there's different membership options that you can read about on the website if you're interested. But I'm excited about that, and so that has also been keeping me busy over the last few weeks as I've been getting all the, like, sort of pieces together to actually create that, and some more to follow on that. And I'm just feeling very almost like we've been anticipating this surgery now because we knew about the surgery date, like, I don't know, 3 weeks ago. But that because she's having, mastectomy and reconstruction that needed plastic surgeon needed to be available too, and so it took a little longer to, schedule, but, so I've been anticipating this, and I've been visualizing just very good outcome, like, the best outcome. Like, I do my meditation, and I visualize that how happy we are afterwards, how well she's done, how, and I've been visualizing sort of related but unrelated. I've been visualizing, like, being very old with my wife and sharing moments when we're both very old. Like, I don't know how old, but our hair is like completely gray and we're sort of, and
Part
so,
of the blue zone.
yeah,
The
right,
blue
right,
zone, yeah.
right. So,
It'll be like 110. Yeah.
yeah, so that feels good. It brings a smile to my face when I do it. I will do it like a part of my meditation. I will sometimes just visualize the future that I envision for myself and and then just feel grateful for that.
Yeah. Well, I was just sitting thinking like that's probably the best place you can be in right now is just meditate on, the life that you foresee for you and your family, you know, especially amongst what's going on. And does your wife practice meditation too? She does, right?
She
We
does.
talked.
And she's been
Yeah.
yeah, and she's been meditating like she gets up early in the morning and I will sometimes come down in the middle of her. She's just sitting there. She doesn't use any sort of guidance. She just
Wow.
sits quietly and centers and focuses on her breath. And she's been telling me over the last couple of weeks, every so often, she's like, I had such a great meditation this morning. I had such a great meditation this morning. And I said, what's so good about it? And I think she's really connecting with that sense of being, and that sort of
Yeah.
is very comforting for her. It feels very full and abundant.
Have you ever thought about meditating with her? Or is that considered your guys' own your own alone time?
Yeah, no, I haven't. I think I think it's a very inward process. I mean, I
Yeah.
have meditated with other people.
Yeah.
There's something about that too. It like creates an energy.
I'm
But
saying, like, if
yeah.
she's frequency she's getting to, she's doing for you, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? You might be able to feed off of her energy that whatever
Mm.
she's tapping into, you know? I don't know. I mean, I've been in, no, I shouldn't say, I think I meditated with not a whole lot of people, maybe a few people. Anyways, the experiences when I was in Florida, we did like a group. It's definitely
Oh, the
something there,
Pivio.
like this, the Pivio, yeah, where you have like this sense of awareness, especially when you're meditating with yourself. It's like when you quiet your mind and you can almost, there's this feeling of like the awareness is there because you're aware that there's other people also meditating, but you're kind of like letting it go. I definitely think there's
Mm.
something to say about that. But yeah, so I don't know.
I was doing meditation this morning. And it's a way to like sort of bring your drop down into sort of this meditative state by like it's just like you're focusing on what's in your field of awareness, and then you're
Mm,
trying to connect with the being that is aware, as opposed to like the kind of, I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, like you think about like the mini me inside of you that's like hearing something, or you can think about the experience of hearing and what is it that's hearing, and it kind of drops you into this place of awareness. At least that's the idea. And you could
mm,
do that with sound or things you're seeing, like, oh, what's in my field of vision? And then what is experiencing this vision? And then there's no words for it. It's actually the whole idea is you get out of your head and you experience like that feel like that. I don't even, it's not really a feeling. I don't know. I have a hard time describing this. But anyway, I did that meditation this morning, and in my car, I was driving back from dropping off my kids. And that's when I used to meditate all the time, was in my car.
when you
Now
got home, you would park and then just meditate before you go in the house. Is that your
I
strategy?
would pull out, yeah, I would pull over either on the side of the road, or we live next to a city college, and I would go to one of the empty parking lots because there's a bunch of trees that like it
Uh,
overlooks, and it was really nice when I
yeah.
opened my eyes. And I did that this morning, even though when I came home, I did my sort of regular meditation. I don't know. I also did this like 5 minutes on the side of the road. I don't know. I've been meditating more. I've been finding it helpful.
Yeah, I was
So,
gonna ask, what do you found yourself leaning into because of the cancer diagnosis?
yeah.
What strategies for health have you found? And they could
Ah,
be
that's a good
strategies
question.
that might not be good for you. You just, or there be strategies that you learn that are working that you're leaning into.
No, I've had some unhelpful strategies. Like I've definitely like indulged on like food, unhealthy things, and used food to some capacity, especially like the first couple weeks.
Mm.
And maybe not the first couple weeks. Like maybe the first couple weeks. And like all the things like, Netflix
Yeah.
and my phone, and
Yeah.
but the healthy things that I'm trying to do more of, well, that is like really like double down on what are the things, cuz I can't tease this apart from my depression. In fact, my wife
Mm.
said to me a few days after, when we went and got lunch to kind of process things, and she said, I was more worried about you than, and I said, what, worried about me? And she's worried about my mood and my depression. And so for those things, like for that, I know like I gotta do regular meditation. I gotta move my body a little bit every day. Gotta make it a point to do that every day. Even when I don't feel like it, I just gotta do something. And then I'll feel like it. That's the thing. So it's all I'm good in those places, but like those almost hadn't been enough. But the big, big, big most important thing that I think I've had to like push myself to do also, because my tendency would be to sort of just um shut down and kind of keep to myself and wallow. And so I've really made it a point to reach out to friends, to my family, to and talk, like try to talk to somebody every day. And so that has been, yeah, and I went on like a hike with a friend yesterday, and I think I think with all those things, like if this diagnosis had come 5 years ago or 10 years ago, like when I wasn't doing these things, like I think it would have affected me differently. And I'd like to believe right now I've been managing my own tendency to ruminate and to get caught up better because of these self-care practices. So I'm just making sure I continue to do those things.
Well, thank you for sharing that because I'm sure like there are those out there, including myself, that might want to know, what types of strategies might help with, dealing with such
Mm,
a big event or such a big new, like such big used.
it's almost like
'Cause
it's like, okay, this thing is happening. It's not something I wanted to happen, and it's happening. And it's like if I was watching this in a movie, like you could see how it would play out where the husband is just like in a bad mood and bitter and upset and nobody wants to be around him and he's like, you know, whatever. Like you could see that movie or you could see the movie where like the husband's just like feeding off that optimism and positivity and just like using it as a vehicle to both receive and give love. Like, this news is nothing, more than it's like I said, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. How is it an opportunity? Like, what is it teaching me? Oh, it's teaching me, like, how important family is to me. It's teaching me how much love we have in our life from so many amazing people, like and so if I take those lessons, then it's hard to then be in a space where I'm just feeling bad. It's actually like the 2 don't really coexist that well together.
no, and I think it's also teaches your kids how to deal with situations like this too. I mean, we're
Mm,
aware that they're always paying attention to how we are as parents, and you know, dealing with this. I think it also that's probably the big thing too. That's one of the bigger opportunities, I should say, is how your kids are viewing you and viewing your wife, and how you guys are dealing with the diagnosis too. You
mm,
know, and it's a reference point for them too. At some point in their life, when they're adults and they're dealing with something, they could probably remember back to this time, and remembering how you guys dealt with it and how dad was and how mom was.
mm, mm.
So,
Yeah, they will look back at this, I'm sure, and so it's just a reminder of, like, you know, asking myself, like, "Who's the person I wanna be? Who's the father I wanna be? Who's the husband I wanna be?" And then kinda living, like, actually doing that, you know? I think
well,
that's
any
good.
final notes? Anything that you want to leave off, like, any kind of rock your life wisdom you want to share with everybody?
No, just that, like, live in a space of gratitude, and you'll create more of that in your life. We've said that before, and now it's like it's easy to say that when things are going well.
Yeah, it
It's
really
easy to
is.
say that when things are going well. It's And it's when things are hard. Meg said that. Meg Donahue said that when we interviewed her, that it's like when things are hard, that's when it really tests
Your character. Yeah,
your
100%. I
character.
agree. It takes, and the things that you stand on, the things that you live by, your own like philosophies that you stand on,
That's
that
right.
you all the experiences that life has thrown at you. It's usually when it's the tough times, that's when you really have to decide
That's
like,
right.
what it is that you're
And
on or about.
the other thing she said is like, we have this, she said they have this philosophy at Mama Says, which is like, we don't give up when things are hard. You can
Mm,
give up at other times, but not when things
yeah,
are hard. And so I've been telling myself that a lot too.
that's a
I've been,
great one. Could you imagine if you're like, yeah, go give up when it's easy? Because you're not
yeah,
gonna give up when it's
you're
easy.
not going to give up when it's easy. Right. Right.
You're just not. I mean, you're
You're
not
just
gonna give
not.
up when it's easy. Nobody ever in the entire history of man
Or
has
if
ever
you
given up when
do, then
it's
it'll
easy.
be no, no, no. Or if you do, it'll be like, "Oh, well, this isn't the right thing for me to do." Like, it's
True.
easy, and actually, that is also a hard thing to do, is to give something up when it's easy. It's what keeps people in a lot of situations in their life,
Mm.
because
Whoa, yeah.
it's easier not to make changes.
Take risks.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah. 2 years to not take risks.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's actually what we should be doing is making changes when things are easy, and really,
Mm.
like, pushing ourselves when things are hard. That's the first sign of discomfort, when we'll sort of retreat and say, "Oh, never mind. This was a bad idea." Now, in my situation
Right.
right now, like, what does retreating look like? It doesn't benefit anyone. So yeah, you just
Mhm.
have to live like a little bit from a space of intentionality, where you say, I'm gonna crush every day. And we've been through so many, some friends of ours said, how many challenges have you guys had in your life? And they've been different challenges. They haven't necessarily been health challenges. And
No.
you know what I mean? And you
Yeah.
figure out like how to overcome, like how to navigate. And in that figuring out is where the growth happens, and the story gets written, right? Because in that figuring out is where you can collapse and create a lot of negative energy, or you can create a new story that's sort of beauty out of a challenging situation.
That was nice.
Thanks, man. It was good. This was like therapy for me. It was like,
It is for me too.
how much do people pay to just talk to someone for an hour, hour and a half? And here I get to do this for free. Yeah.
Yeah, and then everybody else gets to
Everyone else gets
listen
to,
to it and also
yeah,
kind of think
process.
about their own. I mean, plenty of times I'm listening to your story and what's been going on, and I'm applying it to myself. So
Yeah. That's the
definitely,
idea.
right. So
All right.
anything else, Dr. Rod?
Anything? No, Poe, anything you want to say? Any final closing reflection?
Oh no, I think you already said it. I think we already talked about it. I think I just want to like acknowledge your wife, man. I think she's been the focal point of this episode. To be honest, that's what I've been
Yeah.
sort of feeding off of and just
I asked
listening
her,
to
Poe,
about
like
it.
on Friday, I asked her if she would come on her podcast.
I would love to have her on here because I mean
Yeah.
to actually I've never done this before, but where I can actually talk to some. You've probably talked to plenty of cancer patients. I've never had to,
Hmm.
besides relatives, but to actually ask questions that how she is dealing with it, where her positivity is coming from.
Coming
She
from.
might have some insight,
That's
right?
why I
Like
wanted her to that's why I wanted her to come on. I mean, I asked her on Friday to come on today, and she was like, "No way."
that's
And
fine. I
yeah,
mean,
which is fine. She's still in the
yeah,
midst of this, and so she said, "You can talk about it.
yeah,
I'm totally fine with you talking about it." And
yeah,
she said, "I'm not in a place right now to come on your
true,
podcast," and she has surgery
right.
tomorrow.
Which
I get that.
I know.
So, but in the future, I would like to, yeah, I told her, in the future when she's ready, I would love to have her on to talk more about her experience. And
I
yeah,
would love to I would love to talk to her about it, to be honest. If she ever has when she's ready and she feels she wants to be able to share it and all that, I'd love to talk to her about this because I'd love to find out some insight from someone who's actually dealing with something like this. I mean, I tend to think like, oh, I had surgery and all dealing with all that, but it's nowhere near. I feel like when you have a cancer diagnosis, a good buddy of mine had cancer, and talking to him was just kind of like, man, you know, and it gives people too perspective in their own lives. That's the
mm,
thing about it. 'Cause it only makes it's like that's why I asked you about you went from treating, folks with cancer or talking to those as patients.
mm,
Now that it's happening to you and directly to you because it's your family member, does that change? Like, what is that perspective now? Is it the same as it
yeah.
was?
Well,
So that's
yeah,
why
no, it's an
yeah.
interesting question. The last thing I'll say is I've gone back in time in my head and I was sort of like, huh, maybe as empathetic as I try to be, and I feel like I am, like, you can't really empathize with what someone's going
Mm,
through until you've kind of experienced it yourself. And so to your point, like, now that as soon as I felt the immensity of it, I sort of like went back and had way more, even more compassion than I think I
yeah.
had for those people. Even more compassion for their family members, but, not that I was like an asshole or anything in the
No,
past,
no, 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 no.
but
It's
I
just
I
you
I
can't
was,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I wasn't coming from a place of that deep of empathy, and now I think it's affecting because it's affecting me in this way, it's an understanding that I didn't have before.
That's It's always like that. In
Yeah,
anything, it's always until you've actually experienced it, then you have an understanding and a deeper knowing that for those who've never experienced it or can be empathetic, but until you've actually experienced it. And that's why and that's why I would love to have her on because that way she can just speak her own story from how she's
yeah,
experiencing it. Is that, but anyways, yeah, that's what I wanted to say was I just wanted to acknowledge your wife.
yeah,
I look forward to the day of meeting her one of these days,
for
and
sure.
the audience gets to meet her too.
Yeah,
So,
for sure. Okay. Well, Poe, thank you for this conversation as always, and thank you to our
yeah,
listeners, and we really appreciate you. Listeners are all over the world. We're getting listeners all over the world now. It's pretty cool, and slowly but surely seeing more and more of you. If you do listen, please share the podcast with somebody and put a review in on one of your podcast sites. Subscribe to it. This is how we get more, I guess, attention, notoriety,
reviews.
more
Yeah,
views. Yeah. And yeah, and if you have a question or comment for us, you can go to thehealthfeast.com and write in. Um, and we have some great guests coming up, Poe. So the next month or two, and probably beyond that to schedule them. So lots more in store. Anyway, appreciate you, Poe. Appreciate everyone else listening. And we'll see you next time.
until next time.